Okay. Hi there, I'm Victoria Caulfield. I am the postpartum physio and I'm going to be presenting the postnatal pelvic floor today. I work out of the Barefoot Physio in the centre of Exeter. We're going to have some questions at the end, won't be recorded. So the objectives for this evening, we're going to be looking at what actually is the pelvic floor, how to care for the pelvic floor in the early days, the importance of the breath, because I think that's often sort of taken for granted. Breathing, we're not really taught how to breathe, and how to implement good posture, because good posture has a big influence on our pelvic floor, and then actually doing our pelvic floor exercises, because very rarely are we taught how to do our pelvic floor exercises correctly. So what actually is the pelvic floor? We're going to have a really brief anatomy lesson. I'm going to try not to bore you all. So sometimes referred to as the pelvic diaphragm. This is what your pelvic floor actually looks like if you're looking down through, I have my pelvic floor, if you're looking down through the body, okay, so down through this way. So sometimes referred to as the pelvic diaphragm. This is what we're looking at here as we're going towards the floor. This is a muscular sling and it comprises of the listed muscles, and they do sound like gladiator names, don't they? My favourite's obiturator internus. So note the inclusion of piriformis. So if we have any runners here or anybody who's very athletic, sometimes we can have a tight piriformis. So how many of us have actually been told that we have a tight piriformis or tight glutes? So that's technically forming the back portion of our pelvic floor. And it plays a role in supporting the rest of those muscles. And so it's not really just one of those bottom muscles. And then we have our insertions and origins, which is just a jazzy way of saying basically where muscles stick onto, where they attach onto. And if you're looking at that as well, so we've got the coccyx that's noted there, and the pubic symphysis, which is at the front. So sometimes we can get pubic symphysis pain, or if we've got coccyx pain, it's not necessarily kind of the bony elements themselves that could be the cause of the discomfort. Sometimes it's actually those muscles, because if these muscles that we're looking at here, if this is where they're sticking onto and through the bottom here, that can actually be why they're causing pain, because we can get some pulling if we've got a very tight, we've got a hypertonic pelvic floor. So movement, it does actually move. Our pelvic floor moves, and it's really important that it moves. So we need it to move. It's vital that it moves for function, like having bowels opened, lifting weights, having sex, or withstanding downward pressure when running. So to put it into perspective, the pelvic floor's ability to move and stretch during childbirth, I don't want anybody to panic, because some ladies will stretch 25% of its length, but other ladies will stretch 245% of its length. So there's a huge varying degree there. So it needs to move, and for good reason. But like we're saying, it's not just having babies that the pelvic floor has to stretch and to move, but it's important to remember just how much we're having to stretch when we're having our babies, potentially vaginally. So the movement, yes, it's moving. So this slide demonstrates beautifully that synergistic movement of the pelvic floor with the breath, with the diaphragm. So as we're taking a nice big deep breath in, the diaphragm draws down, the pelvic floor comes down, and the belly comes outwards. As we breathe out, the diaphragm moves up, the pelvic floor moves up, and the tummy just comes inwards slightly. This clip is from the Jenny Burrell education. So Jenny Burrell is the founder of Holistic Core Restore program, and she's great. She's got some really good references out there. So note the way the pelvic floor moves with the diaphragm. So when the diaphragm moves up to expel the air, the lungs, and the lungs, the pelvic floor moves up too. So it's kind of supporting almost the pelvic floor. So it's really important. Sometimes you might hear after you've had a baby or in those initial stages, the term blow as you go. So thinking about blowing out and expelling that air, the pelvic floor is moving up and the abdominals are coming in and giving you a nice bit of a hug. So actually it's a really nice supportive way of exerting, because we have to exert abdominal pressure, we have to exert pressure when we lift baby, when we're getting out of bed. So if we remember that phrase, blow as you go, it's quite a helpful one to kind of have in the postpartum period, moving forwards. Even weightlifters to an extent, don't know if you've got any weightlifters here, but powerlifters, weightlifters, you will hear them exhale on the effort. So it's an actual thing. So blow as you go is a helpful phrase to remember through your rehabilitation. So looking at some of the functions of the pelvic floor. it's really important to remember that it had roles. It's not just a muscle or a set of muscles. So it helps support the pelvic organs, the bladder, the bowels, and the uterus. It maintains continence of the bowel with a thick band of muscle, puborectalis, and the internal and external sphincters for bladder basically control. It protects the spine and its muscular sling, and in its ligamentous attachments. It's kind of like a trampoline, if you like, and it looks after the spine. It also contributes to sexual function. So this can be everything from arousal to engorgement to orgasm. So it really is quite a multi-talented sling of muscles, basically. They've got lots of different jobs, and it's not just a kind of a functioning. I always compare it to a bicep. I think biceps get bad press from me. You know, it's not just flexion, extension. There's a lot of things going on there, a lot of really important roles. So it's vital that we have a functioning pelvic floor, as it has such an important role to play in our everyday lives. We need our pelvic floor to have several things for it to carry out those jobs correctly. So we need to have power or strength, so the ability to do a good squeeze and a lift. We need it to have endurance, so the ability to hold that squeeze. And we need it to have flexibility, which is very often forgotten about. So that's the ability to move with the breath and with the body during shock absorption and to withstand downward pressure. So when we're running, it's no good if it's really, really tight and it's not got the ability to move with us, to move with pressure. That's very important. And that can often be sometimes when ladies are getting symptoms of leaking, if we don't have that flexibility in the pelvic floor. And frequently it's kind of mistaken for weakness as well. I think a lot of people think if they're leaking or getting symptoms or pain, it's presumed that it's because the pelvic floor is weak, and actually very often it can be because it's completely inflexible. So caring for your pelvic floor. So toileting position. Most modern day toilets are actually too high. A lot of toilets in hospital are very, very high as well, for a good reason. They've not just made them high for no reason. It's to stop people getting stuck on them, which is why in a lot of places you go to, not only are they very high, you've got a whole multitude of grab rails around you as well. So as a physio, I understand. But it's really important that we know this, because when toilets are too high, it's basically not conducive to good pooing. And it can mean that we're having to push to have our bladder or bowel emptied because they're not in a relaxed position. And we shouldn't actually be pushing to empty bladder or bowel ever. So optimizing your position on the toilet can ease eliminating of stool from the bowel, specifically from the bowel, much easier. Mainly because of the way the bowel, the neck of the bowel sits, it sits at a slight angle. And so when that angle is opened up slightly more with knees being higher than hips, it makes it easier for any kind of stool to be eliminated from the body. So we can compensate if our toilet is too high, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Yes, if you've got a stool, if you've got small people that are potty training or a stool around, great, pop that under your feet. But you don't need to buy anything special. So I just say pop a loo roll under each foot because we've always got them around and they're pretty cheap. Okay, so we're trying to make our knees higher than our hips. So our points to remember, we've got a really unattractive bright green correct position versus the nice colorway that looks awful on her tiptoes. So points to remember: knees higher than hips, lean forward and rest elbows on knees, relax your tummy into your thighs, and sit tall, but we're kind of leaning forwards as well. So we're kind of in a resting position. We want to avoid pushing when emptying our bowels, and especially when emptying our bladder, because of the stretch reflex required for it to basically fill and empty. Specifically, after you've had babies, of course, we want to avoid any pushing. We may have stitches, but also I certainly remember being absolutely terrified of pushing. So having a look at kind of your toileting position is one of the easiest ways that you can make that kind of first initial going to the loo much easier on yourself and much less scary as well. I think we build it up in our heads an awful lot. I promise it's not that scary. So fibre, this is a really important one as well. We should be aiming to consume 30 grams of fibre a day, and this is both soluble and insoluble fibre. It's really important, and I try and favour 30, so as much as you can, and that's kind of leaving skins on vegetables. I was going to say fruit. You don't have to go around eating kiwi skins, but I did meet someone very recently that loves kiwi skins. So whatever floats your boat, however you get your fibre in. The average adult actually is consuming on average 18 grams of fibre a day, and it's hugely neglected in our kind of modern day diets. So making yourself aware of the fibre content of food that you're consuming can be quite eye-opening. So there's only 2.6 grams of fibre in a banana. So if you don't eat the skin, definitely don't eat the skin. But it's just having a look at what you're eating. So things like flax seeds, for example, especially in the postnatal period, the postpartum period, on some porridge. Porridge is really good for you as well in terms of insoluble fibre, but flax seeds, great. So a tablespoon a day can really help bowel movements too. Hydration, so this is super important. A rough approximation of how much we should be drinking is 1,600 mils a day, or drinking, ready for this, I have to read it because it's so confusing, 1/2 to 3/4 of an ounce of water per pound that you weigh. So I don't know about you, I don't weigh my water or myself if I can avoid it. So breastfeeding mothers should be drinking slightly more, of course. It's difficult to find actual amounts because everybody's so different. Everybody feeds differently, everybody drinks differently, everybody's got different body weights, etc. And some professionals again would suggest that drinking to thirst is a good indicator, but I personally would suggest that you're already tipping over to slight dehydration if you're having to kind of come in and think, oh yeah, I'm just gonna have a pint of water, I'm really thirsty. So the best way that we can kind of gauge this is to pay attention to our pee, which sounds really odd, doesn't it? But I'll explain myself. So this slide here is really helpful. So the colour of our urine tells us a lot about what's going on with our bodies. Each time you go to the loo from now on, this is one of the first things I'd like you to do. I want you to pay attention to the colour of your urine and to adjust your intake of fluid accordingly. So we want to be aiming for lemonade to light beer. And I quite like that as well, because a lot of charts, they'll use numbers, and numbers mean nothing to me. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm pretty technically non-gifted. So numbers are terrible, but lemonade light beer, I know what we're aiming for there. So trying to stick around those two. If you know it's summer, you're feeding, you're out all day with baby, it can be really difficult to keep hydrated. So just a little reminder when you're going to the loo, just having a look and thinking, yes, I must drink more. And then of course, the next time you go to the loo, it's a bit of an automatic check-in again. So it's really important to keep an eye on just how hydrated we are. So how to implement good posture. The importance of good posture. So reminding ourselves of the earlier slide of the breath, remember with the moving segments of the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. So they directly influence each other, the breath and the pelvic floor. And posture also influences the pelvic floor. So that diagram, it was really clear, wasn't it? You had your abdominal wall, your back muscles, diaphragm at the top, and then pelvic floor, and everything was in a nice line. But if you imagine we all start to slump forwards and turn into little croissants, as I say, like a posture croissant, all curvature. This can of course be really easily compromised. And of course, if we add into that, you've just delivered a baby, you're quite sore, you're quite tight, your neck muscles are really sore, and you're just a bit exhausted. And then on top of that, we may have stitches, you may have delivered abdominally as well. And you're feeding your baby, you're carrying your baby. It doesn't matter how you're feeding baby, breast or bottle, you're still in this position all the time and you're constantly looking down. So we can, our posture can really, really become quite compromised. So there's a massive increase, of course, in time spent sitting down as well. So then we all become chair-shaped, just to add into the mix. I'm not painting a very nice picture here, it's wonderful, I promise. So the pelvic floor and abdominal wall can actually be offloaded if we implement good posture as best we can, because sometimes we are quite sore, we're quite bruised, and it's quite painful. So as best we can, implementing good posture is really vital. So some of the prompts I use in clinic to help with gentle posture kind of day to day are to imagine that your head is a balloon floating up into the sky. Because let's be honest, if someone came along to you, my husband used to do it all the time, and he'd like try and pull my shoulders back into and it would just be horrible because bolt upright sitting isn't helpful. So remembering that your head's a balloon and it's floating up into the sky naturally draws your chin down slightly, pulls you up through the crown of your head, and opens up your shoulders. And then the next one, basically, thinking about your collarbones and sliding your shoulder blades down your back. So I always say that your collarbones are smiling, or you're wearing a big, beautiful necklace and you want to show it off to everyone. That's my absolute favorite, because automatically it does two things. So it opens up the front of the chest, it lifts the breastbone, so it lifts the abdominal wall, and then it slides the shoulder blades down the back really nicely. That one's that's my secret weapon. Welcome. So that's a really nice one. If we can remember that every time we've gone to kind of put baby or small person down, then we implement that nice posture. It's just resetting yourself throughout the day, and that can make a huge difference. Trying to relax tummy as well. It doesn't matter. I think it's just something we intrinsically hold as women. We're constantly belly gripping and holding our tummy in, and of course that can play real havoc with our pelvic floor as well, because it likes to move. Everything likes to move, and the second we start to grip things, hold things, is the second that actually they start to get quite tight, quite tired. Other structures take over their jobs as well. So we're trying to stay nice and relaxed and implement that lovely posture as best we can. So why is posture important? So if you remember how our pelvic floor and abdominal cavity and diaphragm are structured and help each other move, there's effectively a stacking effect, like we just said. So as when we slouch, these connections between the structures slacken off and the structures slouch into one another. So this can often actually give us symptoms as well. So lots of ladies will feel quite heavy, sort of down there, if they're slouching, if they're kind of slumped as well. And a lot of it's to do with the position of our pelvis too. So looking at the position of our pelvis, if we're implementing good posture, so if we're slumped in the chair, we can start to have things kind of coming backwards. And then if we go the other way, if we go to a lordotic posture, so a slightly different posture, we can have pressure coming to the kind of more on the front wall. So it's looking at all of our positioning and posture kind of throughout the body. We want to be activating muscles because when they're activated in their kind of neutral position, they're actually at their optimal and strongest to perform the task you need to perform. So if we think about implementing good posture and picking a little person up out of a cot, for example, our tummy muscles, our back muscles are going to be at their strongest to pick the little person up if we're in a good position. So it's kind of runs through everything really that we do, because we want to try and avoid back pain. To do that, we need to be in a good position, have good posture. So good posture can also cue into the breath and encourage the abdominal wall, pelvic floor and diaphragm to move in synergy, which is what we just chatted about as well. Pelvic floor exercises. It's a fun one, isn't it? This is normally when I ask everyone who's done their pelvic floors today, but I haven't done mine, so I'm not going to. It happens, doesn't it? These things happen. So basically in the early days, so the first 7 to 10 days are important for general recovery of the pelvic floor. Rest is absolutely vital. You will feel like Superwoman, and I certainly did. And there's no doubt about that. But the long walks and being out and about, pushing baby and pram can wait. Just taking it nice and steady. What we really need to focus on is purely the breath, taking these lovely big deep breaths, good bladder and bowel habits. You've got your toilet rolls under your feet, you've got your stools, you're leaning forward, you're eating lots of fibre, drinking lots of water, staying really well hydrated, looking at your good posture as well. And this is for vaginal delivery with no complications. So that's no episiotomy, no ventouse, no forceps, no abdominal birth. So this is just your pure vaginal births. So we can resume pelvic floor exercises roughly 7 to 10 days post-delivery. And again, that can vary depending on our ability and how we're feeling as well. And I'd recommend doing them always in side lying to get that really nice connection, because side lying offloads gravity, gives the pelvic floor a nice chance to rest, and helps with the connection of mind and pelvic floor. And are we lifting? Yes, we are. We can get that nice breath work going too. So the early days, so for assisted deliveries and for C-sections, so we'd kind of say that we'd put these together because basically there's an extended time frame of healing that needs to go on. So we'd say that pelvic floor exercise can be resumed 3 to 4 weeks. So there is a slightly extended timeline here. Everybody is different, of course. The reason for this is, of course, the slightly longer periods for assisted deliveries and C-sections, where the body has potentially a greater degree of healing to contend with. And it may be harder to achieve optimal positions, like we said earlier, with the posture and everything. So if we've had some abdominal surgery, we may be slightly less inclined to stand up straight, although it's one of the most important things. And that's what I'd really stress, is the importance of actually not worrying about the pelvic floor exercises so much, but actually getting optimal functional positioning to take those nice big deep breaths, to be able to stand and bring your shoulders back and stack yourself properly, kind of upright. Lots of ladies say they kind of feel like they need to walk around with their hands on their hips after having a C-section or abdominal birth. So it's important that that's the first rung of the ladder basically climbed before we then start the next rung of the ladder, which is pelvic floor exercises. Because if we're doing pelvic floor exercises and we're not in that nice optimal position, is the pelvic floor able to contract as it needs to? And it's kind of questionable, really. So for the first 3 to 4 weeks, we're looking at breath specifically, diaphragmatic breathing, and a nice neutral posture. So really thinking about being kind to yourself and getting into that nice neutral posture. So after 3 to 4 weeks, pelvic floor exercise can be resumed at a level that you can comfortably manage inside lying. And we'll come on to the numbers now, because I think sometimes there's a lot of, oh, I need to hold for 10 seconds and 10 seconds. I think I managed about 2 after I had my daughter. So there's no expectation. The actual guidelines, and these are not for postpartum, so this is general population here. There aren't any postpartum or postnatal guidelines as such. So the National Institute for Clinical Excellence guidelines state that pelvic floor muscle training programs should comprise of at least 8 contractions performed 3 times a day. The NICE guidelines state pelvic floor muscle training programs should comprise, that's NICE guidelines, sorry. So the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recommends, and this is slightly different, 10-second holds for 10 sets. So they're the longer holds, and then faster squeezes for 10 reps. So that's almost like a second squeeze and release. So slightly different there. And I tend to go personally with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists as the top level. So if you can do 10-second holds for 10 seconds and then 10 shorter reps, brilliant. I can tell you now, say if we take an average month in clinic of the ladies that I'll see, probably maybe one can do that if we're having a really good month, and I am also including myself in that. Make that what you will. So how to actually do your squeezes. There are some very specific mental imagery prompts that I use in clinic to help people connect with their pelvic floor. There have over the years been lots of different ways to do your pelvic floor exercises, and I'm sure you've heard them, ladies talking about them, which is good. I think women talking about pelvic floor exercises is great. So we just got to get the right prompts out there. So the latest research suggests the most effective way to teach your pelvic floor squeeze is to cue it from the back passage, like you're trying to hold in wind. So basically, we're looking at these muscles here. Can you see the way they loop around the anal sphincter muscle there? They are really big muscles, really big, strong muscles. So in the past, there has been kind of things said around trying to stop yourself weeing. Those muscles are quite small, actually. So if we can use the big muscles around the back passage, it gives us much more of a lift, much more of an effective squeeze. So thinking that you're trying to hold in wind. Another prompt I use in clinic is to imagine that you're picking up a coffee bean with your anal sphincter muscle. I know, I do that so much. So it's just finding the prompt that's right for you. And these are always used to assist the correct muscles being used and utilized. So reps and sets. Pelvic floor exercises need to be committed to daily. And again, postnatally and postpartum, it's what you can manage. And we will have a bit of a chat about that. So I realize that some days none may be completed when partner's gone back to work, you're there with a small person, potentially other people in the house as well. Life is chaos. So it's about just doing what you can manage and not getting into bed and thinking, fabulous, I'll now do 30 pelvic floor exercises. Don't do that. Just do one set. If you've forgotten in the day, don't worry. Don't feel the need to do them all. We will have good days and bad days. So not all of them will be completed, but other days we may complete 2-3 sets, which is great. It's about consistency where possible. So the long holds, basically what I look for ladies to do is to initiate the squeeze, or initiate the pelvic floor squeeze from the back passage, and to hold this for as long as you think you are able to hold it for. So as long as you can feel the connection, but no longer than 10 seconds. That's how I do a longer hold. So we'll do that, and then we'll see if we can get to 10 seconds, and then we'll see how many of those that you can complete. And I've got a little example coming up in a minute. So you may be able to do 5-second holds for 4 reps. Fabulous. They are your longer holds. So the shorter holds. So initiating the pelvic floor squeeze from the back passage again, holding this for 1 to 2 seconds, and then releasing, and trying to complete 10 reps or however many you feel capable of. Some ladies can do 4, great. Some can do 10. Fantastic. It's what you feel capable of doing. So what is right for you? And this is what's really important. So this is the individualized kind of aspect. So there are different thoughts on reps and sets, but generally for me personally in clinic, when I'm getting ladies to train their pelvic floor to become stronger, I like to prescribe 10-second holds for 10 reps as an endurance aspect, or the kind of endurance we're looking at increasing to the pelvic floor. And then the shorter squeezes for 2-second holds for 10 reps. And those to be done for 3 times a day. So again, everybody is different. Sorry. So realistically, sometimes we can completely forget, and other times we manage twice a day or once a day. We're aiming for sustainability. Excuse me. When I'm assessing ladies, I focus on how long they can actually hold for. Sorry. So how long they can actually hold for. Sometimes this is 4 seconds, and for 5 reps, sometimes they can do 8 seconds for the 8 reps of the 2-second holds. It's vitally important to do pelvic floor contractions that are right for you, to utilize your breath throughout the exercise. So we're still encouraging that strong, flexible trampoline of a pelvic floor. So important points. The pelvic floor needs strength and endurance and flexibility. Depending on the type of delivery you have, it needs to be taken appropriate time to rest and recover. Then restart pelvic floor exercises where you can manage. Above all, complete the holds that you are capable of and build up from there. Remember the importance of the breath in between the squeezes, breathing in and out fully. So how to find me? Sorry. So this is my Instagram tag here, Victoria Postpartum Physio, for your daily pelvic floor reminders. And then this is my blog, thepostpartumphysio.co.uk. I do lots of different posts on prolapse, diastasis, and sex post-baby, and the latest research is always on those blogs. Goodness. Any questions at all?
I'll just stop recording now. Thank you so much, Victoria. I really appreciate that. Water down you.